Welcome to the Shared Path. I'm Maggie Linton. We've got a very interesting man who is a speaker, an author, excellent author, and also a historian. And we are pleased to welcome Phil Dixon. He's covered African American baseball for over 35 years. He's written numerous books on baseball and is highly regarded for his knowledge on baseball history and research. He won the prestigious Casey Award for the Best Baseball Book of 1992 and later received a Sabre McMillan Award for his excellence as a researcher. Phil has appeared nationally on numerous networks, including PBS, C SPAN, BET, Fox Sports, Sirius XM Radio. I know he appeared with me, and the Canadian Broadcasting System. Phil is an international speaker and co founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, where he served as the museum's first public relations director. He's formerly worked in public relations for the Kansas City Royals. Now, I've got Negro Baseball League hats and a few other things, but I didn't have a shirt. So did the
All
Royals
right.
one for you.
Nothing wrong
Okay.
with it. Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
Okay, Phil, let's talk about your background and what spurred you into the field that you're in now and what you're doing.
Well, I just fell in love with baseball at an early age. I always like to tell the story how in 1964, was really into the Beatles, and they had these Beatles collectible cards that were put out by the Topps Baseball Card Company. And I made the mistake of taking my cards to school, and the teacher took them. And so when I went back to the store to get more Beatles cards, there's nothing there except baseball cards. The Beatles cards are sold out. And so I started buying baseball cards. I was in the second grade, and I got my earnings for going to the store for neighbors. And back then, of course, you could buy a pack of cards for 5 cents. They even had penny packs back
And
then.
include bubble gum too, didn't it?
Yeah, it had the
Because I
bubble
remember
gum.
those
Yeah,
days. Yeah.
and uh, and even a comic book cost a dime. So yeah, I would go to the store, and one lady, her name was Miss Davis. I'm going to have to dedicate a book to her one day because she made a lot of this happen. And I would go to the store, and she had two things that I would always get for her, and it was skim milk and snuff. So
That's
uh,
a heck of a combination.
yeah, it was a heck of a. But she was a single lady too. I can see
Uh-huh.
why with that snuff, but but she was a nice lady. And because people like Miss Davis, unsung people, that's the reason why I'm here today to be able to talk about this because they financed me in just those little tiny ways that
Hmm.
made me grow into the person who just loved baseball. And once I was able to play baseball, I just, I said, wait a minute, I can be pretty good at this, and got better and better, and played high school baseball, played in the summer, and then my first coach was a guy by the name of Sherman Roadblock Jones. And he had pitched for the New York Mets in 1962. Now, he wasn't actually my first coach. He was the first coach I had when I put on a real uniform. Before then, I was in blue jeans and a t-shirt. But I just fell in love with baseball early, and through the baseball cards and through the people in my community, I developed a love for it, and then finally in 1980, after really already really just being inundated by baseball, I met my first Negro leaguer. Now I had met Negro leaguers before because Eddie Dwight lived across the alley from me,
Wow.
and
Okay.
but I didn't really know he was a Negro leaguer. I heard he played for the Monarchs, but okay, who were the Kansas City Monarchs, right? I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the first time I actually talked to someone, it was Carol Ray Motho in Topeka, Kansas in 1980. And no looking back from there.
Yeah. Well, you have certainly met a few now, in fact, quite a few, and also started to tell their history, which is one of the most important things that is out there right now. Because way too often, people focus so much on Jackie Robinson, but there's so much more. And I can remember the Royals when Satchel Paige came to pitch for them and the uproar that there was about him coming out. Nobody knew how old he was, but he still could pitch.
Yeah, yeah. Satchel Paige. He's a legend. He's a legend. One thing I'm really proud of is Satchel Paige is buried here in Kansas City, Missouri, and there's a big monument where he's buried at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. And Buck O'Neill is buried in that same cemetery, by the way, and so is Johnny Taylor, the famous singer.
Yeah.
But on the back of Satchel Paige's monument, there's a little poetic saying, and I wrote that on the back of his monument. It connected me to an all-time legend, and I've written a lot of things since, but there's probably about, maybe 30, 40 words, but those are the best 30 or 40 words I've ever written.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Well, let's go back and talk about, because we're going to talk about Negro Leagues baseball in general. Of course, there's that fabulous museum that you helped do a lot of the research and help found, and talk about that. And then we'll go back and talk about the people who are in there.
Yeah. Well, the museum ideal came out of this. In 1982, I went down to Ashland, Kentucky, and they were trying to kick off a Negro League museum in Ashland, Kentucky. And so I went down there, and it was part of a tour that I was taking, interviewing Negro League players. I went all through Atlanta and all through Indiana and North Carolina. I went through the whole thing driving, right? So I'm in my early 20s driving, and I went to Ashland, Kentucky, and I looked around and I looked through their archives and things like that. And I came back to Kansas City, and I remember talking to a guy named Horace Peterson. I talked to Buck O'Neill. I said, you know what? We can do this in Kansas City because there's only three places that I thought a museum needed to be. And that was either New York, Chicago, or Kansas City. And since I was living in Kansas City, I could muster the forces together. So it took a few years. That was probably 82 when I made that trip. And in 1990, five of us went down and incorporated the Negro Leagues Museum. And Buck O'Neill, who most people know is connected to the museum, a lot of people still don't know I'm connected to the museum. He was the oldest of the co-founders. It was five of us who signed the original incorporation, and the youngest guy was right under Buck O'Neill, and that was myself. And so that was a great achievement to bring that to Kansas City, and now it's just grown by leaps and bounds. And sometimes there are things I go down all the time, but what I've kind of realized is that my work is really still out there amongst the people and going to small towns and communities that have no idea they're part of the Negro League story. And so that's the role that I've kind of taken. And so I'm out all the time. But yeah, it's turned out to be just fabulous. And now they're ready to expand. They're having a capital campaign to raise $25 million. And I guess that's pretty good. And if they expand as large as they want to expand, they will be as big as Cooperstown.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Well,
so
they
that,
deserve it.
yeah,
As you mentioned, you brought the museum there, but the real Negro Leagues was formed at the YMCA on Paseo in Kansas City. Am I correct?
that is correct. The
Okay,
Picel
so which is
YMCA.
even more of a reason for it to
Yep.
be in Kansas City and for people to really support it.
Yep. That is correct. And one of the guys who is my favorite player, it was Ruth Foster, who
Mm.
was the first president of the league. Now, his daughter-in-law, Doris Foster, was a big booster of mine. And at the same time, his sister was still alive when I first went to Chicago. And I used to go up to the apartment where they were, and I learned a lot about Ruth from his direct family. And show you how far I go back. There were people who were still alive who used to visit Ruth Foster because he had a nervous breakdown, and he spent his last 3 or 4 years at the mental hospital in Kankakee, Illinois.
Mm.
And so I was able to talk to people who would go up and visit him that were in the family. And I would always ask him, how was he acting? What was going on? And the reason I did that, because I knew one of these days I was going to run into a doctor and I could give him these symptoms and he could probably tell me what was going on because all the records from the hospital are, long destroyed. But yeah, Ruth Foster, a monumental person. And my next book is about his 1910 10 team, which I happen to think is probably second or third greatest baseball team ever assembled. They, believe it or not, they took on all competition and they won 123 games and lost seven.
Whoa.
They didn't,
That's
they were,
and they played all the time, and it was mainly daytime baseball, wasn't it?
Yep. Oh, yeah. It was all daytime at that time. Night baseball doesn't come into vogue until 1930. There were some attempts prior to that, and one thing about it, you might find this interesting. I grew up in Kansas City, Kansas, and one of the first ever lighted football fields was Haskell Indian College
Really,
there
in
in
Lawrence?
Lawrence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in
Wow.
1929, they put lights in the football field. That was the greatest thing. So the owner of the Kansas City Monarchs took the team up to Haskell Indian College, which the field is still there, had them turn on the lights, and the Monarchs took batting practice, and they did everything that you would do in a baseball game, all right, so they could get that experience. And then the next year, J.L. Wilkinson launched these Ford trucks that had these extensions on them, and they had big generators, and that became the first modern day night baseball. And the first time that night baseball was played in Pittsburgh's Forbes Field was with those lights. The first time night baseball was played in Cincinnati's Redlands Stadium is with those lights. And so J.L. Wilkinson and the Kansas City Monarchs did a lot to pioneer night baseball.
See, again, facts that people don't know, we overlook it now because everything's lit up almost like daylight in, in the many stadiums around the country, those that have been remodeled and rebuilt and everything.
Right.
But it's nice to know again some more facts. At the height of Negro Leagues baseball, how many teams were there?
Well, in the league, they were always 8 teams. So when Rube Foster started the original league, there were 8 teams. Now, what's interesting about those 8 teams is this: that he had the Chicago Giants, he had his team, the Chicago American Giants, and then they had the St. Louis Giants. And so people say, well, why did they have 3 teams with the same name? And on my most recent tour, I wear a Giants uniform. And my whole opening is about the reason they were called giants is because they did not put black people's photographs in the newspaper very often at all. So going back, they needed some kind of way to identify which teams were black. So because some of these people didn't want to support black baseball, right? They wouldn't even go to the park if a black team was playing. So what they did was they began to use the term Giants. So if it wasn't the New York Giants, when it typically it was not, almost every team had this Giants in their name. And then later on, when the Negro National League came, the Monarchs, they established in 1920. And of course, there was Indianapolis ABC. But this Giant name is a part of that whole legacy. And so, yeah, so 8 teams, 3 teams named Giants, and they also had 2 teams named Stars, the Cuban Stars and the Detroit Stars. But these are names that were synonymous with baseball during the segregated era. And even in the entertainment field, if it said Pekin, you almost know that it's going to be black. Pekin was the code word for entertainment. So so yeah, so once you kind of understand that history, you kind of know, okay, so they had 8 teams in the Negro National League, and then the Eastern Color League started in 1923. They started with 8 teams, but they were all in the East. And probably, I would say about 1932, 33, they began interleague play. And so, which is popular in Major League Baseball today, but Negro League teams are doing that already. The other thing they did, and a lot of minor leagues do this, they had a first half and a second half of the season. Used to be in Major League Baseball, you know, they didn't have all these divisions, the East and the West and everything like that. So they play a long season. So if you're in last place, you had no way to catch up, right?
None.
So what do you think happened to fan support? Yeah, they so the Negro Leagues to fix that, they had a first half and a second half. So you could finish maybe in third place in the first half and then finish in first half, first place the second half. Now you get to play for the championship at the end of the year. and then whoever wins that gets to go and play against the Eastern Color League. So they had some clever little things they were doing, and when the more you learn about these men and who they were, and some of these great owners who don't get any recognition, and so that for me, it's fun to tell these stories because there's still so much to learn.
You're a man that's really in demand with your speaking engagements, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I want to continue talking about the formation and the some of the owners, like you say, that nobody seems to know about, and they managed to get everything that they needed for their players, except the acceptance of so many, say, white people, because
Mhm.
black people were coming out and supporting them.
Yeah. And a lot of white people came out supporting them too because
Mhm.
they wanted to see good baseball, especially when they
Yeah.
went to the smaller towns. And so, if you come, like for instance, the 1910 Leland Giants that I just mentioned, right? Believe it or not, they played in your hometown, Leavenworth, Kansas.
North Kansas.
Yeah,
All
they were
right.
coming from Oklahoma. They came and played the Kansas City, Kansas Giants. Here we go, the Giants again.
Mhm.
And so the Giants scheduled one of their games in Leavenworth, Kansas, and the other three in Kansas City, Kansas. Right, and they had their
Mhm.
own park there at Second and Franklin Avenue. And so um, yeah, the way these teams moved around. Now a couple of owners I really like to talk about. One of them, I'm writing a lot about him now because he's not written about much. His name was Beauregard Mosley.
Love that name.
I know
That's a
this.
great name.
Yeah, this guy was out of Chicago, and he actually was the money man behind the Chicago Leland Giants. Frank Leland was the guy who created it, but Beauregard Mosley was the money guy, and he was an attorney and a lawyer there in Chicago. And they said he had more white customers than any black lawyer in Chicago. And he knew everybody. He was plugged in. And he knew Charles Kaminsky over at Kaminsky Park. And he was
Mhm.
one of the few black people who could get Charles Kaminsky to open his stadium to let black teams play. So Rube Foster pitched the first game there in
Boy.
1910, but it's because of Beauregard Mosley. And Beauregard Mosley owned hotels. One thing, there was a black resort area called Idlewild
Mhm.
that was in Michigan. Well,
Right.
if you go and you look at the history that's online about Idlewild, you will not see anywhere Beauregard Mosley's name. Big mistake, because he owned more land in Idlewild than anyone. Unfortunately, Beauregard Mosley died from the flu epidemic in 1919, and today his name is just a minor footnote in baseball history. But we're gonna bring him back.
It's good. That's wonderful. Name a couple of other owners. Wasn't there a woman who was an owner?
Yeah, that actually she was like a co her. It was her and her husband.
Okay. But she got a little bit more fame than he did it for a while, didn't she?
Oh, she's in the Hall of Fame.
There you go.
So that, I guess that makes her. She's the only lady that's ever
Hmm.
been enshrined in Cooperstown, right?
Hmm.
And interesting thing about her, and most people don't know this. Her name was Effa Manley. Now there's still a lot of debate. I just purchased a book the other day. I'm going to get ready to start reading it about Effa Manley. It's right over here. I'll look, and I'm going to read it and trying to see what more I can find. But there's most people know that Effa Manley was really a white lady passing as a black lady.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I
and
did not know that.
she married a black guy, Abe Manley. And Abe Manley was a numbers banker.
Runner. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. He was the big guy over in Newark, right there in the Brooklyn area, and so that's who she married. And so while he was busy doing that business, she ran the baseball team. And so that's how she became famous, and that's why she's in the Hall of Fame. Now, she did do some things that I didn't always agree with because, but that's a whole different story for another day. but, but so I get in some debates with F and Manley people who don't dig deep enough,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
so I thought that the price she was selling players for set the established the market,
Hmm.
and so the major league teams after integration after Jackie Robinson, they were able to get ball players who were literally worth hundreds of thousands for 5 and 7 $15,000, and so it wrecked the Negro leagues.
Yeah,
And well, the rest of the history. Negro leagues, they were gone shortly thereafter.
right. Uh, how did they recruit their players? Because they don't have the scouts like they do nowadays in baseball. Where did all these players came from everywhere?
Yeah, well, there were certain players. Okay, let's use the 1910 Leland Giants, right? They had a nucleus of guys who came and played for Rube Foster, right? And these guys branch out, right? So, but they had worked their way up to get to Rube Foster, so they knew of other ball players. So, in 1910, they had this really great team. 1911, several of the guys leave, like um, John Henry Lloyd, Pete Booker, and those guys went and formed the Lincoln Giants. And so the Lincoln Giants, then they started recruiting guys that they had seen play. So once they would go, somewhere, or they might play a team, like they were traveling down south, or somebody from down south would say, hey, it's this great guy down here. You guys need to get him up north. And so they would go and bring these players, and but they had a system. Now they didn't have a minor league, but almost every town where there was black people, there was baseball. And black communities all over America served as their minor leagues. And even when I first started following baseball, I could go down to the park and see the men play, and grown men playing like at least 3, 4 times a week. These were guys who would come after work. And a little brief story. When I was 15 years old, I was playing for a local bank, black-owned bank. All these teams sponsored by black
Mm.
businesses,
Right.
and so I was playing for Douglas State Bank, and I was at the park all the time. And it turns out that one of the guys on the men's team was going to be late. So they needed an outfielder, and I played outfield. So they asked me if, do you mind, come in and fill in for the guy till he gets here. Man, I was so happy to play with the men's team. I'm 15 years old. And right when I got ready to bat, the guy showed up in his car, and I didn't get a chance to bat. And nothing came to me in the outfield. But just the honor. And then seeing these guys and seeing the older players who were teenagers that were above me, and seeing how, they were so respected in the area as athletes. And many of these guys, not only did they play baseball, most of the kids that I follow would be on the basketball team. They'd be on the football team, and you could switch season. They were just fantastic athletes. And so these were my heroes, short of the guys that I would eventually meet in the major leagues. But I always had my local guys that I followed, and that's how the tradition started. So minor leagues were everywhere that black people lived, and they could get 9 guys together to play baseball.
When I was growing up, there were so many black players within Major League Baseball. Now, you find more of the Hispanic Central American players. Kind of people look at them and say, "Oh, they're black." Well, not really. And it's like blacks have now focused on NBA and NFL. I was watching the NFL draft from Kansas City the other day, and I think that, out of the first 10 or 12 players, they were almost all black. What's happened to baseball?
Yeah,
Why has it lost its shine among the masses?
yeah. Well, I think with the decline in communities, what the traditional black communities, people are just fanned out. And uh, and then baseball, in my time, the city park, we could walk to our park, and after the game, it's nighttime, we walk home together, and it was a more of a community type of event. And it would, I would see some nights, they even had a playground there so kids could come in and play with. So when the lights came on, the kids were still playing like they were at home. But yeah, I would see nights where there would be 150, 200 people at the ballpark.
Mm.
And I have not seen that. Now I coached for 30 years and I just kind of watched it as the interest just kind of waned. But a couple of things is you're right. There are more kids playing football now. They're more excited about football. And I've seen a lot of good athletes playing soccer now. Um, and then of course basketball. And then the other thing is they want you to specialize more now. So that going from season to season is not as open as it used to be. So a lot of basketball guys, they got to go, play summer basketball on their own teams, and or football guys, they're at camps. And so the baseball guys are, it's like we're not getting the best baseball players, but I can still tell you this: when a guy loves baseball, he's a black kid, he's usually pretty good. So
Yeah,
I've seen some great players over the years, and
I
but
have too.
yeah,
That was my
and
dad's favorite. That was his favorite sport.
mm,
NFL came in later, but baseball was it. And even as a little kid, I can remember going to Kansas City, to
yeah,
watch baseball. And right after church, mom
yeah,
would cook some chicken and put it in a bag, and we'd go. That's
yeah.
where my love for sports came in.
Yeah, and baseball is just it's still a beautiful game.
Mm.
I know when I coach baseball, a lot of the guys stayed with me for years. I had kids who stayed with me 7, 8 years. We just grew up together. And but what I always try to still instill in them is a love for the game and an understanding for the game. So when you think people are standing around or guys up there trying to slug a home run, I don't happen to think the home run is the greatest hit in the game. Now if the game's on the line and you can get a home run, that's all right. But guy hits a home run with nobody on base, and you know I probably rather see a guy get a triple and somebody make a play and let him slide in or something. But
Yeah,
but nowadays you turn on the TV and they're showing nothing but the home run. But most kids will never hit a home run.
right.
They're going to hit singles, doubles, and that kind of thing. So I
Small
think the
ball.
way, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
so I think a little bit of how they portray baseball is kind of misleading as well. And uh, and then they also put a lot of emphasis on how hard a guy can throw. Oh, that pitcher is 90. I saw guys, growing up who could throw 90 miles an hour, and I just loved them because if the ball was straight, you can throw it as hard as you want to. You just get the timing. It wasn't moving anywhere. It was just coming hard and straight.
yeah.
But it's more to the game than throwing hard and hitting home runs.
Right. Very true. Let's talk about your prolific number of books that are out there, and your latest one that's getting ready to come out. It's about who we were talking about earlier, Buck O'Neill.
Yeah, yeah. That's that, right now, okay, every book I put out is my favorite book. So, but every book has a little bit something different. The
Yeah.
Buck O'Neill book, it came out in 2022, so it was last year.
Okay.
And it was the first ever book of baseball to have QR codes. So you get the book and you scan the QR codes, and you can hear an interview with me and Buck O'Neill back in 1985. It's the earliest recordings you'll ever hear of Buck O'Neill, and they're in my book. And so just using modern technology. And so I've tried to do something different like that with every book. And my second book, which was 30 years ago, had 600 photographs in it. And so that's the feat that's never been duplicated. So now I can
Mm.
add, we have the first ever, period, baseball book with QR code. So still trying to be cutting edge after all these years, but it's a really good book. Talks about Buck O'Neill's life coming up to joining the Kansas City Monarchs in 1938. And then if you read through the book, you can follow the Monarchs along the barnstorming trail all the way to the end of the season when they play the House of David. And House of David was a religious cult out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. And I would throw this in as a sidebar. I was in a documentary called House of David, Life Everlasting, because their leader, Benjamin Parnell, taught that if you join our community, you will never die. And so Maurice Doolittle Young, a baseball player, introduced me to the House of David back about 1982. He was a big student of religions, and he told me about Father Divine and Haley Selassie and Daddy Grace. I'd never heard of these people before, but he was
Oh,
really into it.
yeah.
I went over to interview the guy about baseball. So if you ever get a chance to go like to YouTube and put in um, House of David, Life Everlasting. There's a little 8 minute clip. And this documentary is so great that it won a Cannes Film Festival award. And
Wow.
just this past month, it won a Bollywood award for the
Over in
best
India.
American documentary. And you know what? And I'm the only black guy in it. So I'm really proud of it. But I know a lot about the House of David, but I kind of in 1938, that's who the Kansas City Monarchs ended the year playing, the House of David. And they had these beers and they were traveling around the country. So I'm able to tell all this history, and it's American, it's Americana is what it is. But it's also baseball and it's also Negro League. So I get to mesh
Hmm.
it all together.
Yeah, yeah. And I got a chance to meet Buck O'Neill too one time when we were doing a show out of the baseball museum, Negro Leagues
Mhm.
Baseball Museum in Kansas City. And he was just joyous. He
Mhm.
was so proud of that museum and the part of history that he had played in it.
Yeah.
He
Hmm.
was a very special man.
Yeah. Buck O'Neill, I owe him a lot. You know, I went to work for the Kansas City Royals, and Buck was one of the people who recommended me. And when Buck O'Neill recommends you, do you think you get the job? Oh,
You
I
think
got
you
the job, all
should.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was able to work there. And then when I left the Royals, I remember talking to Buck, and Buck said, "Hey, when I got you the job, I was hoping you were going to retire there." I said, "Buck, it's hard working in Major League Baseball. They don't treat you
Mm.
right." I said, "Buck, I can't do what you did." And a lot of people don't realize Buck took a lot to become that senior person in Major League Baseball. He sacrificed a lot. And most people don't talk about the way he sacrificed. He should have been a manager. You
Hmm.
know, he could
Yes,
have
he should
he
have
could have
been.
managed one of their minor league teams. And but instead they put him as a scout to just go scout the black colleges. And most of his career, he could only sign black players. So, but but he should have been more. And he always, you know, he felt like maybe he could have got the general manager's job, and then he would say,
Mm.
"Well, you know, I didn't have the education because Buck had went to the eighth grade because they didn't even have high school. There was four black high schools in the whole state of Florida, so black kids were only going to the eighth grade, and then you had to leave. And so he did go to Jacksonville, and he went to 2 years of high school at Edward Waters College, and then went into the college for 2 years. And Buck always felt like, well, you know, these, you know, how can he compete with some guy who went to Notre Dame or somewhere like that? The truth of the matter is, he could have competed had he
Knowledge.
been given the opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah.
because college doesn't make a great baseball mind, and I can give you lots of examples to prove that. On the major league level, the Negro League level, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. Very true. Uh, One of the other things we have to talk about is you do have a good social media presence too, because nowadays social media is so important with Facebook, Instagram, and you're out there and being very, very busy and also on Twitter. But I know you are on, especially on Facebook.
Yeah, you know what? I love people. So when I go out to these places, I take a lots of pictures, and you know, I have a lot of senior citizens that come in, and you know, and for me, a senior citizen is 50 plus, right? And so,
Thank you.
yeah, so they come in and they enjoy my presentation because if even if you don't like baseball, I've been at this so long that the social history in my presentation covers all of that. So people come in, they say, I didn't, you know, I don't even like baseball, but I love your presentation. And so, you know, they buy books, and you know, and we take lots of pictures. Sometimes, some nights I will leave, I may have 50 pictures and I may have only shared 10 of them online. I've got the rest of them in my camera. But it's a lot of beautiful people I've met in just small communities and, you know, major cities. But it seems like I have my most fun when I go to a community and they don't know how the role they play because the community might be predominantly white, but then I'll talk about the white promoter who had the guts to bring in this black team and play and bring them year after year, and your ancestors who supported them coming here, who made their appearance the biggest event of the year. You know, you don't want to forget about that. And then, of course, occasionally I'll run into somebody and they say, "Oh, my grandfather's told me that he pitched against Satchel Paige, and do you know when that game was?" And he said they came here in 19 so and so, but he can't find the game, and so I can help them. And yeah,
Yeah.
but it's so much fun, and these people that sometimes they cook dinners. Um, um, oh, you name it. I've eaten a lot of
Home
dinners.
cooking, a lot of
Yeah,
home cooking.
home
Yeah.
cooking, home desserts, a lot of Cracker Jacks,
Yeah.
ice cream. I've seen a lot of baseball cakes. But this is what made baseball fun for everybody. And so I have a great time, and it's so enjoyable to go back to some of these places.
You talked about promoters or something who would set it up. Let's talk about the Dean brothers,
Mm,
Dizzy and Daffy. They loved chasing the coin, and they didn't care who they were playing, did they?
yeah,
They
oh
opened up
yeah.
a lot of doors, didn't they?
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Dizzy and
Yes,
Daffy Barnstorming Tour: Race, Media, and America's National Pastime.
exactly.
Writing about Dizzy Dean was amazing. I like to tell the story that in 1934, Dizzy Dean ran up against Satchel Paige, and he saw Satchel Paige for 3 games. And in the first game, Satchel was pitching a no hitter, and they took him out in the 6th inning because they wanted him to pitch the next 2 nights because that was making the fans come, Satchel Paige against the Dean. So they said, no, you can't pitch a complete game. You're gonna have to come back and pitch tomorrow. But anyway, Dizzy Dean saw him. And at the end of the year, some sports writers got together. Dizzy Dean was known to brag a little bit on himself. So they figured he'd start bragging on himself. When they asked him, they said, who's the greatest pitcher you ever saw? And they thought he'd going to say himself, but he turned around and said, "No, greatest pitcher I ever saw was a colored boy named Satchel Paige." He said, "If you could get him and me on the same team, we could win the pennant by the 4th of July and go fishing till the World Series starts." That was Dizzy Dean. But Dizzy Dean was a great American legend, and
Mm-hmm.
I have pictures of Dizzy Dean all over in my basement,
Mm-hmm.
and but it was a joy to write about Dizzy Dean and his brother Paul. And what's interesting is I may be one of the few black guys. Matter of fact, I can't think of anybody else who can write about old white guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I write about the Negro Leagues. Oh, I'm working on another one right
Uh-huh.
now about a white guy, right? But it's
Yeah.
all baseball and it's all
Mm-hmm.
fun. So,
Yeah.
but I just happen to have enough knowledge to be able to do that, and because I just genuinely love this national pastime.
All right. Well, I'm going to close it out, but we've got to tell people about your beautiful website where they can get autographed books as well as a lot of other memorabilia. I've seen a lot of it. During COVID times, you sent me a great mask
Uh,
too that had the baseball players all on the front of it. It was great. But you do have some beautiful prints that are available. But talk about putting that website together, NLB Alive. Am I
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
NLBalive.com. And
.com.
and the reason why I was working on it while I was trying to tour, it was so hard. But then a little thing came along called the pandemic, and I have time on my hands. So we finished that website,
Mhm.
maybe about May of 2020, and people began buying books, and they're still buying books, and a lot of people follow me. And so my big thing now, I just put out a blog the other day. So some of these stories that I just haven't gotten into books, I'm going to start writing blogs because I have so much material from doing over 500 interviews that I just haven't released. And this is information that when people are looking at newspapers online and think it's not going to show up. I interviewed these people and I asked pertinent questions to get the best information I could from some of those people. So the website is going to be one of those places you can go, and I probably would do, a blog every couple of weeks in between my books and tours. So I'm excited. It's been a welcome addition.
Where are you going next with your tour?
Where am I going next? Well, I know I'm headed to New York. Let's see, where am I going? I have to think about it sometime. Sometimes I have to think, I one night I was speaking and when I speak, I always open up with poetry and end with poetry.
Hmm.
But I was speaking, I was giving some kind of spiel, and I said the wrong city. I said, "Where am I tonight?" I had to think about where I was. Uh, but I always tell people go to the website because I will start listing those more.
Okay,
Now I
good.
can tell you this past week I came from Wichita. I was at the Allie Little's World of Treasures, World of Tiny Treasures. This guy had two mummies
Hmm.
in Wichita,
Okay.
Kansas.
I missed that when I was living in Wichita.
Yeah, it was amazing. And then I
Yeah.
went to Tulsa the next day to throw out the first pitch. And while I was in Tulsa, I was able to visit of course, let's see, which one is oh shucks, I'm drawing a blank. But they had a couple of wonderful museums up there. And of course, Ray Doswell, who used to be the curator at the Negro Leagues Museum, is now at the the Tulsa Massacre Museum, Black Holocaust.
Mhm.
So he's there now. Unfortunately, he was in a meeting, but I did go to the Bob Dylan Museum, which
Mm.
was real amazing.
Yeah.
And the Woody Guthrie Museum. Those are the two names I couldn't think.
Ah,
It
yeah.
was amazing. So
Yes.
and when I go there, I get ideas for things I want to do with baseball. So
Mhm.
you never know. Woody Guthrie might show up in one of my events. And the last thing I might mention on the
I
events
don't
was,
think he's really going to show up,
well,
but
not yeah, not physically, but
no.
but something he did might,
Yeah, I agree.
and a lot of people don't know I was a professional musician at one time.
Oh, well, wait a minute. I did not know that.
Yeah, so I open up a lot of my presentations, especially on the road. I might play Lift Every Voice and sing. And if my
Yeah.
wife's with me, she will tell them why the song is important, what the song
Hmm.
meant to Black people. And
Hmm.
then we have the audience stand and we play Lift Every Voice and sing. And some of these people say, I've never heard that song. Or one lady told me recently, I've had several people tell me this, I never heard that song until I watched the Super Bowl
Yeah, Cheryl Lee
last
Ralph
year.
knocked it out of the park, didn't she?
They had never heard the song before.
I
So we
know.
give them the history, and I play solo on my trumpet. And I think last year I played solo national anthem in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, at the Sioux Falls Canaries game. So, so I'm doing poetry. I might play the horn, and
I'd
but I'm
say.
going to talk about baseball regardless. So it's all been fun.
Phil, thank you. It's absolutely wonderful always to talk to you. You're a living history treasure of not just back Negro Leagues baseball, but of baseball in general, which makes you very special. Once again, folks, it's Phil Dixon. He's author, he's a historian, and he's also available for speaking engagements
Always.
and always. And check him out online, through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Phil Dixon, Phil S. Dixon. And you can also go to his beautiful website. It's NLB, which stands for Negro Leagues Baseball
Mhm.
Alive.com. NLB Alive.com. Thank you so much.
And
Wonderful
thank
seeing you.
and thank you too, Maggie.
Well, folks, for all of you out there, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, continue to seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.